Hey, you guys, welcome to the Odinic School of Mysteries. I think, what is this, number 4? I think it might be number 4. So I was planning on talking about the World Tree today, but then I read the news, and then I decided that, screw that, we are going to talk about truth. And it's a tricky topic. It's a very tricky topic, but we're gonna push through, and we're gonna figure this out. So this is by no means going to be exhaustive today. This is designed to be the definition, or it's an explanation in the way that it is explained to initiates, mystery school initiates. I don't know how they do it in other mystery schools. I'm not sure of their curriculum. I've never been a Mason, for example. I don't know how they teach this stuff. I know how I was taught this stuff. So I'm going to teach you the same way my teacher taught me. With that said, there's a few things we got to get underway. So first of all, we have to understand, okay, so what are we talking about when we talk about truth? If you Google it, which is hilarious, have you ever Googled truth? Look, I have it written right here. The quality or state of being true. I know. It's like, well, thanks. Well, that certainly clears things up for me. I really appreciate that. Well done. now I could go and I could use it in the world and understand what it means. You know, it's like defining something by using itself is stupid. It's like saying, what is a leg? Well, it is the act of having legs. It's like, it's dumb. So there is I would say more of like a common example. I wouldn't say this is like the perfect example, but the way most people would understand truth would be something like the study of the things that are. They just exist. Either something is or isn't. So the study of things that is another one of those things that it's not a fantastic example. Because appearances are deceiving. There are things that don't really quite mesh well. It's very subjective. It's not a great definition. So there's another definition that is, I would say, is probably more is more widely used in the mystery school traditions, and it assumes, this definition assumes a lot of the stuff that we're going to cover a little bit after this. But their definition, which comes from the Hermetic tradition, which we get the word Hermetic from the Greek god Hermes, who was kind of a incarnation or adaptation of the god Thoth. The Greeks were very handsy with other people's cultures, and they loved Thoth. You know, the Greeks, they were in possession of Egypt during the Hellenistic period, and they adopted a lot of their mystery school traditions, and that's where we get Hermes from. That's where we get the term hermetically sealed from. It's from that idea that something is secret and is tight and closed off. So their particular definition, or I should say a version of their definition, would be the study of the form and the function of the things that exist within the mind of the all. I know that's kind of a word salad, but I'll say it again slower. It's the study of the form and the function of the things that exist within the mind of the all. It's something that is very controversial, especially in the heathen community, and especially even more so in the greater polytheistic version of things. But it's something that the Egyptians understood, and that a lot of the most, if not all, the mystery school systems understood, is that it was physically possible to have multiple gods and one God at the same time. We will obliquely address that today. Obliquely. Not directly, but obliquely. We'll cover that probably in some other video down the road somewhere. Okay, it's multiple for two things to be true at once. But the problem we run into, and now we're going to get into, remember what an arcanum is? We discussed an arcanum. An arcanum is the thing that must be known first before all other things can be known and understood in their appropriate contexts. I'll say that again because it cannot be understated. An arcanum, arcanic knowledge, runic knowledge, is knowledge that must be known first before all other things can be known and understood in their appropriate contexts. And that, before you could understand truth, God, the gods, yourself, or anything else, you have to understand the concept of language, of the runes. I cannot state that enough. The runic knowledge, the wisdom tradition, the Greeks called it logos. I think it was the Greeks. They called it logos, the language, the ability to speak something into creation. You have to understand what that is. So, my son, for example, he's 2.5. And the part of his brain that allows him to sew multiple ideas together isn't quite developed yet. So, ideas are like these islands that exist out in the ocean, and they're separated by all this water. Language, the ability to speak, is what rewrites your brain. It's called the logos. It's called the runic language, the ability to see and understand. So let's say you have a pink wall. That's its own island. Bear with me here because you cannot, this is the way you get to understand things. Okay, you have to bear with me through this point. You have a pink wall. That is its own, the color pink is its own idea. It's its own idea. Okay, it's separate. You have a wall. That is its own idea. Completely separate. You have the direction of right. So let's say like my right hand. You have the direction of right. Each of these things are their own islands separated from each other. But through the power of language, through the power of being able to speak, you add two words to that mix of the. What happens? What happens when you add of the to this idea? To the color pink, to the wall, to the direction right. You get right of the pink wall. Suddenly, all those ideas are sewn together and create a whole new organism, a whole new set of ideas. The thing, its description, its direction, where it exists in space and time are suddenly all wrapped together into its own organism. That is the power of language, and it cannot be understated. Okay, so when we are talking about truth, our English language is woefully insufficient. Is absolutely, totally, and woefully insufficient. And I can't state that enough. Because, like we talked about earlier with love, there are multiple things that exist under the heading of truth. And and the reason it gets so freaking muddled is you don't possess the runic language. You don't possess the logos, the ability to sew all those together, you don't have the means of categorizing all the things that exist within that heading. It's all disorganized. So what we're going to do today is we're going to cover, thank you for sticking with me, 2 different facets of that. My teacher explained it to me like this. In the sense of a broader definition of things, you have what he called high truth. High truth, or you might even call it holistic truth, is truth that cannot be altered. It's a universal law. It just, no matter what you do, you cannot escape it. It is something like the law of cause and effect, for example. It is, which we'll go into in just a second. It is the thing that cannot be altered. It is a fundamental truth of the universe that this action creates this effect, right? It's done. There's just no getting around it. A low truth, or you could say like a personal truth or something, is like is kind of a subjective truth. It's like a truth that says, well, I really think that the color blue is the right color. I think all other shades of color are wrong. I think that, too much taxation is bad. That kind of thing. That is a low truth. It's like a truth that's like my personal opinion. It's subjective. It's subject to change. It's not going to be the same for one person to the next. It's just whatever. Okay, so that's the first thing to understand, is that you have 2 different parts of truth. You have a high truth, things that cannot be altered. It is set in stone. It is the law of God. It is the law that the gods have put forward into the universe. It cannot be changed. The gods themselves have to obey this. They're subject to the same processes and the same things that we are. Low truth, on the other hand, is I have a preference for my haircut. Right? Ooh, that is hot. So the next part, and this really, this is the most important part. And all of this preamble is to get us to this point. When we talk about truth, when we ask the question, what is true? What is the actual thing that exists in the universe? What we are really talking about, without realizing it, is the law of cause and effect. On the surface, this is a pretty easy concept, right? It makes pretty good sense, but in practical working knowledge, it's a little bit more complex. So the surface definition works pretty well. It's pretty easily understood. I punch you, it's a cause. Your face gets hurt, an effect, right? That's basically what it is. I create an action. There's an effect that is created by that action into a measurable effect that is created in the universe. Every action, how does it go? Has opposite or equal reaction to it, something like that. I apologize. I keep burping. So I think it may be one of the laws of thermodynamics. Maybe one of the laws of motion. I can't remember. That, I put this much force into something, it's going to have an equal amount of reaction to it. Law of cause and effect. Simple. But the law of cause and effect is a little bit more complex than that. The laws of causation and the laws of effects are basically an electromagnetic field. You're probably going, what? Let me explain. I'll put a picture up here somewhere. A electromagnetic field, it's also called a torus shape. A toroidal shape looks like a donut. It's like looks a bit like this. Let's put it up here somewhere. And you have a magnetic field. You have a magnet in the middle with a positive charge and a negative charge. A positive polarity or charge is basically energy being pushed out of itself. You have the electromagnet, and then you have energy that's being pushed out. In ancient symbolism, this is called male. This is called the male polarity. We'll get more into this a little bit later. A negative charge is called a female polarity. A male polarity, think of sex, energy pushed outward. Female polarity is things being accepted into herself. Right. The feminine receives, masculine it pushes out. Okay. We'll get into, there's going to be a video about the ancient symbolism of gender and how that functions in the universe. That's all we're going to talk about. We're not going to get into much more of it today. Anyway, the realm of causation is like the magnet. And then that magnet, that cause, produces these two poles on either side. One that gives and one that receives. Energy is pushed out, and then is received back into itself. So oftentimes, what we try to fix in the universe isn't actually something that's fixable. Because you can only fix causes, you cannot fix effects. For example, people are trying to fix gun violence. They try and fix gun violence by trying to work with guns, by trying to get rid of guns. You can't fix gun violence by getting rid of guns. You can't do it because gun violence is an effect. It's a little bit like saying, which is more true, for example? Hot or cold? Well, which is it? That's a silly question, and most people wouldn't know it's a silly question because the average thinking person hopefully knows that temperature is an effect of a lot of different environmental factors. There's a lot of causes that are brought to bear which creates the temperature. Wind and pressure and elevation and time of year and sun, angle of the sun to the earth, and just on and on and on and on. There's a lot of things that create temperature. So it would be stupid to say which is more true, hot or cold. But people don't bring that same thinking to bear when it comes to these other things. They don't realize that some of these things that they're trying to fix are actually effects. You can't fix an effect because the effect is already brought to bear on the universe. It's already created. If I punch you in the face, sticking with the violence example, if I punch you in the face, right, it's already done. I can't unpunch you in the face. Your face is already punched. It already hurts. There's nothing I can do about it. And another explanation of this is the Greeks would say that truth, the Greeks say that truth is a snake that eats its own tail. It's called an Ouroboros. It's you've probably seen it. It's a circle like this, and there's like a head that swallows its own tail. For those of us in the heathen community, we would understand Jormungandr to be this very thing. He represents time. He's a snake that eats his own tail. He represents truth. And when he lets go of his tail, when time, truth, lets go of his tail, the world falls apart. So there's some pretty heavy symbolism in there. So when we are measuring truth, when you encounter something that has a gradation, like we go back to the weather thing with temperature, you say, where does hot start and cold end? Right? You can't really answer that because there's layers of degrees between one extreme and another extreme. When you have something like that, that is a very good indication that it is actually an effect of something else. So we go back to the gun violence thing. We talk about guns. I use this example because it's one of those things that are hammered to death in our modern political sphere. It's just hammered to death, and I can't tell if it's ignorance on the part of people who are pushing this, or if it's a deliberate red herring to get us arguing with each other. My guess is probably both. So let's break this down real quick. We're going to go through this really quick. Like I said before, it's possible for two things to be true at once. It's possible for two things to be true at once. It is possible for two things of opposite natures to both be true and wrong at the same time. So what is the argument? Very simplistic way of arguing this, okay? I know there's a lot of stuff in there. People say, well, regulation and all that. I know there's more stuff to this, but this is for explanation, okay? Cool your jets. The way the argument tends to go is, if we have the way to curb gun violence is to put a lot of guns out into society. So that way, when there's a crazy person and he gets a gun, because bad people always get guns, and he decides to shoot people up, there's a lot of people there with guns who could stop the shooter, who could end the violence very quickly. Right? Good people with a gun is better than bad people with a gun. On the same token, the opposite is true. If you have a lot of guns in society and bad people are going to get a gun, because bad people always do, they have a much easier time of getting a gun, so the bad person is going to have an easy time to get a gun. It's going to be easier for him to shoot people up. Opposite end of the polarity. So that is the positive polarity, the male portion of that argument. The guns pushed out into society. Okay. The opposite polarity, the one down here, the female polarity, the sacred feminine side of the argument, the part of the argument that pulls things into itself, is the removal of the guns. Guns are being sucked up into the feminine polarity, into the negative polarity. All right. So that argument says, if we get rid of all the guns, or heavily regulate the guns, it is much harder for bad guys to get the guns, and so therefore it's be harder for them to get the guns, less gun violence. Right? Other portion of that same polarity is, if that happens, bad guys are always going to get guns. There's not going to be enough people with guns to protect. So if a bad guy does get a gun, he can shoot people up pretty easily. There's not enough people to protect themselves. Right? That's the way the arguments go. Both are true at the same time. Both are true at the same time. Both poles are true at the same time, with a lot of gradient in between. But you can't fix that. No matter which polarity you try and fix, you try and dink with, there's fight. You will never fix it. Like I suggested, the positive, both sides of the positive polarity, both sides of the negative polarity, there's always going to be a pushback. There's always going to be a cause and effect that will make it so you can never fix those two poles. It's because you can't fix effects. You can only fix causes. If you want to fix gun violence, you have to ask the question, what makes both of these true at the same time? Sir Francis Bacon said, and I quote, half of science, I know this seems radical idea, half of science is putting forth the right questions. Half of science is putting forth the right questions. So, where am I at? 25 minutes. So, if you want to know the truth, if you are observing something in nature and you want to know its true nature, you have to have the language, the logos, to be able to articulate and understand the true nature of what it is that you're observing. If you don't, you're going to spend your entire life trying to fix causes that can never, ever, 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 ever be fixed. And there are people out there who know this. They know the law of cause and effect. And so they're going to get you to fight tooth and nail about which effect is true. Which is true, hot or cold. Which is true, guns out, guns in. They're both wrong. They're both right. But they know that you don't understand this runic knowledge about truth. They know that you don't get it. So we encounter this all the time. We encounter these kind of arguments all the time. Which is true? Creation or evolution? Quick. Which one's true? Have an answer? Did God or gods create the universe? Or is it a product of time and small incremental changes? Come on now, which is true? They're both true. And they're both wrong. It's possible for both of those things to be true at once. You got to sometimes you got to ask, instead of saying which one of these is true and which one is wrong, sometimes you got to ask the right question. What makes both of those true and wrong at the same time? Then you could actually get down to brass tacks. Excuse me. Then you could actually begin to grasp the true nature of the universe. You see these ancient alien guys. People, there's a whole new religion that was just sprang up, and people didn't even realize that. Did you know a new religion showed up? No one even knew it. It's the based on the Sitchin books, the Anunnaki. Who is the good guy? Enki or Enlil? Well, they're both good and bad at the same time. So what's the causation of that? What makes that both true at the same? What makes them both right and wrong at the same time? I mean, this is the thing. You got without the language. This is the part that it's hard. That's really hard to communicate, and I don't know how much better to do it. Is that learning the mysteries? Learning the mysteries is learning a new language. You are learning a brand new language. It has its own vowels. It has its own nouns. It has its own adverbs. It has its own way of explaining things. It has its own way of observing the language, observing the universe. It has its own descriptors. It has its own pictures and lore. It has its own way of being in the world. And it's hard, I know, but this is why you got to take the time to do the work. You can't just take a symbol and just say, this means that. All-seeing eye of the Illuminati. It means that they're watching you all the time. No. No, 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 no. You'll never, ever, ever, ever get to the bottom of it with that kind of thinking. You just won't. It's its own language. It's its own way of viewing the universe. They understand this concept. They understand cause and effect. So you would be very well served to buy the book, The Kabbalion. I actually loaned it to a friend of mine. His name is Jason. He's awesome. Okay. I think he's going to start his own blog soon. He does a lot of yogic practice and that sort of Eastern philosophy stuff that I'm frankly not very versed in. But by the book of the Kabbalion, they talk about the master key. The law of cause and effect is one in a set of 7 keys. At some time, we're going to talk about what a key is. I'm not going to talk about it today. But it is a very specific thing. A key is a very specific thing. You've heard of the keystone. You've heard of the key of Solomon. You've heard of the master key. You've heard of... These are very specific. They are very specific. The keys to the doors of the underworld are all very, very specific things. A key is a mystery school device that unlocks doors for you. But by the Kabbalion, it's called, they discuss the master key, which is a set of 7 keys which unlock the entire universe. And the law of cause and effect is the first arcanum, I would say, is the first arcanum to understanding truth. All right? About 32 minutes. I'm 2 minutes over. I try and keep these below 30 minutes, but what the hell? All right. Well, my friends, I love you, and I hope you have a good day. All right. Bye-bye.